I never thought I'd be the guy sitting across from someone, trying to convince them I'm not losing my mind. But here we are. You know how it is when you're down in the dark. You start to trust your ears more than your eyes. And lately, my ears have been telling me things I can't unhear. Why do we keep going back into places the world clearly tried to bury? Is it the silence, or the fact that down there you're the only thing that's supposed to be breathing? But what if you aren't? What if the shadows you're seeing aren't just your headlamp playing tricks on the limestone, but something watching you back, waiting for your light to fail? Stick with me, because what I found in the Bladenboro woods last spring didn't just change my career, it's been hunting me ever since. It was mid-April in North Carolina, one of those thick, heavy springs where the air feels like it's holding its breath. The sky was a flat, bruised gray, the kind of cloudy that doesn't mean rain, just a ceiling that feels way too low. I'd driven out from Denver a few days prior. Not my usual stomping grounds, but a contact in the local caving scene had mentioned a subsidence feature on private land near the Bladenboro border that wasn't on any map. My name's Keanu, by the way, and I've spent 15 years squeezed into the tightest cracks of the earth, so a little undiscovered hole in the ground was like a siren song. I'd spent the morning hiking through the pine barrens, the ground soft with needles and the scent of damp earth rising up to meet the overcast sky. Hiking is usually my way of decompressing, but that day the woods felt wrong. You know that feeling when the birds just stop? It wasn't immediate, but by the time I reached the coordinates, the only sound was the rhythmic thud of my boots and the occasional snap of a dry branch. I checked my GPS, then looked up at the cluster of jagged rock outcroppings poking through the greenery like broken teeth. The entrance was a squeeze, a narrow vertical fissure hidden behind a curtain of overgrown kudzu. I had my gear laid out on a flat rock. My primary LED, 2 backups, my helmet, and my tactical knife. I don't usually carry more than that, but something about the local history I'd skimmed in an old Creepy Carolinas magazine at a diner, all that talk about the beast of Bladenboro, made me pack a heavy-duty bear spray, just in case the local coyotes were feeling bold. I remember laughing at the magazine at the time, thinking it was just a way to sell pancakes to tourists. I met up with my partner for this trek, a local guy named Marcus, near the mouth of the cave. Marcus was a veteran climber, solid as a rock, but even he looked a bit twitchy. "Weather's turning sour, Keanu," he said, glancing at the darkening clouds. "Clouds are getting lower and the wind's picked up a weird hum." I told him we'd only be down for a few hours, just a quick survey of the first chamber. We checked our watches. It was 2 p.m. We figured we'd be out by dinner. Getting through the squeeze was the usual claustrophobic dance of exhaling and pushing, the cold rock scraping against my chest and back. But once we popped out into the first gallery, the scale of it took my breath away. It wasn't just a cave, it was a cathedral of shadow. Our headlamps cut through the gloom, reflecting off damp walls that looked almost like they'd been polished. And then, the smell hit us. It wasn't the usual musty mineral scent of a cavern, it was organic, rotting meat mixed with a wet, musky odor, like a dog that had been rolling in roadkill and then sat out in the rain. "Something's using this as a den," Marcus whispered, his light sweeping the floor. "We saw bones, small ones at first, probably deer or raccoons, piled in the corners. But as we moved deeper towards the secondary tunnel that sloped downward, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Wedged in a crevice was a hiking boot, a modern, heavy-duty hiking boot, still laced up, but shredded as if it had been through a wood chipper. We should have turned back then. Logic tells you to leave when you find signs of a predator, but the Zeigarnik effect is a hell of a thing. That nagging need to finish what you started to see the end of the mystery. We had to know what was down there. We moved into the secondary tunnel, the ceiling dipping low, forcing us into a crawl. That's when we heard it, a low guttural rumble that wasn't thunder from the surface. It was coming from the dark ahead of us, a vibration that I felt in my teeth. It sounded like a growl, but it had a weight to it that no wolf or bear should possess. And then the smell got 100 times worse. That rumble didn't just hang in the air. It crawled up my spine and settled in the base of my skull. Marcus froze dead in front of me, his boots inches from my face in the narrow crawl space. "Keanu, tell me you heard that," he breathed, his voice cracking just enough to let the panic in. I didn't answer. I just shifted my light past his shoulder, the beam trembling against the jagged limestone. The tunnel opened up into a wider chamber about 10 feet ahead, and as the light spilled into the void, it hit a pair of eyes. They weren't like a deer's eyes that catch the light and glow a flat, empty silver. These were amber, deep and intelligent, reflecting our LEDs with a terrifying, predatory gold. They were set high, too high for a wolf and too narrow for a bear. As we watched, paralyzed, a massive shape shifted in the darkness, the sound of claws clicking against the stone floor like hail on a tin roof. It stood up. That was the moment the allegedly true stories I'd read in the magazine became a cold, hard reality. It stood on two legs, hunched over because the 7-foot ceiling was too low for it. The Dogman. Its muzzle was long, filled with an impossible array of teeth that seemed too numerous for its jaw, and its ears were pointed, twitching toward the sound of our ragged breathing. It was covered in coarse, matted fur, black as the cave itself, but its front limbs ended in hands, not paws, long, dexterous fingers tipped with curved, black talons. "Back up," I hissed, my voice barely a thread. "Marcus, back up slowly." But the creature didn't charge. It did something worse. It tilted its head, mimicking the way a curious dog looks at a confusing toy, and let out a soft, huffing sound, almost like a laugh. It was testing us, gauging our fear. I reached for the bear spray on my hip, my fingers fumbling with the safety clip, but the creature suddenly lunged forward into the light, letting out a roar that felt like a physical blow to the chest. The sheer volume of the sound sent us scrambling backward in the dirt. Marcus turned, trying to find footing to climb back toward the squeeze, but the floor was slick with that same musky filth we'd smelled earlier. He slipped, his leg wedging into a narrow crack in the floor. "My ankle!" he yelled, and the sound echoed through the chamber like a dinner bell. The creature stopped its roar and went silent, dropping onto all fours. The transformation was seamless, its spine undulating as it shifted its weight. It moved with a terrifying fluid speed, closing the gap between us in 2 bounds. I managed to get the bear spray up and squeeze the trigger. A cloud of orange mist hissed out, filling the narrow space. The Dogman recoiled, pawing at his face and letting out a high-pitched yelp that sounded horrifyingly human, but it wasn't enough to stop it. Its blind flailing sent a massive claw raking across the side of the tunnel, sending shards of rock flying. One of those claws caught Marcus across the calf. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony. The creature's talons had shredded through his heavy canvas trousers and deep into the muscle, like they were made of wet paper. I grabbed Marcus by the harness, pulling with every ounce of strength I had, managed to jerk his foot free just as the beast lunged again. We weren't thinking about exploration anymore. We were 2 animals trying not to be eaten. I kicked out blindly, my heavy hiking boot connecting with something hard and fur-covered. The creature snapped its jaws inches from my knee, the sound of its teeth meeting like a spring-loaded trap. "The crevasse, Marcus! Get to the crevasse!" I pointed toward a narrow, lateral split in the wall we'd passed on the way in. Too small for the beast, but a tight fit for us. I shoved him toward it, acting as a shield, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. We scrambled into the split, the rock catching on my gear, tearing my shirt and scraping the skin off my shoulders. We squeezed in about 6 feet, deep enough that the Dogman couldn't reach us with its bulk. It slammed against the opening, the entire cave wall seeming to vibrate from the impact. Its arm, long, corded with muscle, and terrifyingly human-like, reached into the crack, the claws scratching at the stone just inches from Marcus's bleeding leg. We sat there in the suffocating dark, listening to the creature's heavy, wet breathing just on the other side of the stone, realizing we were trapped in a tomb of our own choosing. The silence that followed the scratching was heavier than the rock above us. Marcus was hyperventilating, the sound wet and jagged in the cramped space, and I could smell the metallic tang of his blood beginning to fill the air. "Keanu, it's not leaving," he whispered, his voice trembling so hard I could barely make out the words. I clicked my headlamp to the lowest setting to save the battery. In the dim glow, I could see the dark stain spreading across his pants leg. Marcus hissed in pain, his eyes darting toward the sliver of darkness where the Dogman had been reaching for us. "Why did it stop?" he asked, his eyes wide and glassy. "It's waiting," I replied, though I didn't want to believe it myself. "It knows this is the only way out, and it's got nothing but time." We sat there for what felt like hours, the damp cold of the North Carolina earth seeping into our bones. I kept thinking back to that magazine article I dismissed. It had mentioned how these things were known for their patience, for herding prey into corners. I checked my watch, 4:30 p.m. On the surface, the cloudy spring afternoon was probably turning into a grey evening. But down here, time had no meaning. Suddenly a sound echoed from the main chamber, a low, melodic whistling. It wasn't the wind, it was rhythmic, almost like a bird call, but it had a distorted, vocal quality to it. "Is that another one?" Marcus gasped. The realization hit me like a physical punch. The Dogman Lair wasn't just a clever name. If there was a pack, we weren't just trapped, we were being surrounded. I knew we couldn't stay in the crevice. Eventually, our lights would die, or Marcus would go into shock from the infection that was surely setting in from those filth-coated claws. I looked deeper into the crack we were hiding in and noticed a faint movement of air. In caving, a draft means an exit, or at least another chamber. "We're going deeper," I said, the words feeling like a betrayal of every survival instinct I had. Marcus looked at me like I was crazy. "Into the lair? Keanu, that's suicide." "Staying here is a death sentence, Marcus," I countered, pulling him upright. We began to shuffle sideways through the squeeze, the rock always pressing against us like a closing vice. The path sloped sharply downward, the floor turning from solid stone to a soft, spongy carpet of organic debris. As we emerged into a lower cavern, my light hit the walls, and I nearly vomited. This wasn't just a den, it was a trophy room. Skulls of livestock, deer, and things with shapes that looked disturbingly human were wedged into every nook. Some were old and bleached white, others were fresh. In the center of the room lay a pile of discarded human belongings, rusted watches, tattered backpacks, and more of those shredded hiking boots. Marcus stumbled, his weakened leg giving out, and he knocked over a stack of bones that clattered like dry wood. The whistling outside stopped instantly. Then came the response. A series of rapid, heavy thuds directly above us. They weren't just in the tunnel anymore. They were on the ceiling of the lower chamber, moving through the karst honeycombs like spiders. I pulled out my tactical knife, the blade feeling pathetic against the scale of the threat. "There," Marcus pointed his light toward the vertical shaft at the far end of the room. A rusted iron ladder was bolted into the rock, remnants of some old mining operation or a forgotten civil defense project from decades ago. It led upward toward a faint, bluish glimmer that didn't look like headlamp light. It looked like the moon. But as we scrambled toward the ladder, the shadows above us detached themselves from the ceiling. Two more pairs of amber eyes ignited in the dark, and the air was filled with the sound of snapping jaws and clicking claws as the pack descended for the kill. The air in the trophy room became a cyclone of motion as the two new shapes hit the floor with the heavy, muffled thud of pure muscle. One of them was smaller, leaner, with a coat of blindingly gray that shimmered under my LED like hammered lead. It didn't roar, it hissed, pulling back its upper lip to reveal gums the color of raw liver. "The ladder, Marcus, go!" I yelled, shoving him toward the rusted iron rungs while I stepped back, my knife in one hand and my last canister of bear spray in the other. The grey one lunged, its body a blur of predatory instinct. I didn't wait. I emptied the entire contents of the canister in a wide arc, creating a wall of chemical fire between us and the pack. The creature shrieked, a sound that was half canine and half human woman screaming. and they retreated for a split second, clawing at their faces. I didn't stick around to watch. I turned and scrambled up the ladder, the metal groaning and flaking off in orange scales under my weight. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs, and my lungs burned from the pepper spray lingering in the stagnant air. "I'm at the top," Marcus called down, his voice echoing from a small square of light above. I climbed like a man possessed, hearing the clack 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 of claws hitting the iron rungs below me. They were coming after us. They didn't need ladders, but they were using it to get to me faster. I felt a hand, no, a paw wrap around my boot. The strength was immense, a crushing pressure that threatened to snap my ankle. I kicked down with my free leg, my heel connecting with a wet nose, and I heard a satisfying crack. The grip loosened just enough for me to lung upward, grabbing Marcus's outstretched hand. He hauled me through a narrow concrete opening, an old maintenance hatch for a forgotten drainage system, and we tumbled out onto the forest floor. The cool night air hit me like a bucket of ice water. It was dark now, the clouds finally breaking to reveal a jagged, pale moon that turned the pine trees into skeletal fingers. We didn't stop to catch our breath. We ran. Marcus was limping heavily, leaning on me as we crashed through the underbrush. The sounds of the forest suddenly amplified. Every snapping twig sounded like a bone breaking, every rustle of wind like a huffing breath. We reached my truck, parked on the shoulder of the old logging road, in what felt like a fever dream of adrenaline and terror. I fumbled the keys, dropped them into the dirt, and let out a sob of pure frustration before snatching them up. As I threw the truck into gear and the headlights cut through the dark, I saw them. 3 silhouettes stood at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still. Their eyes caught the high beams, 6 gold coins glowing with an ancient, hungry intelligence. They didn't chase us, they just watched, as if they were marking my license plate, memorizing the sound of my engine. We drove straight to the hospital in Bladenboro, where Marcus was treated for a severe animal attack. The doctors whispered about mountain lions or black bears, but the look in the sheriff's eyes when he interviewed us told a different story. He didn't ask many questions, he just told us to go back to Denver and stay out of the North Carolina woods. That was a year ago. Marcus still walks with a limp, and he won't go near a basement, let alone a cave. As for me, I still have that magazine, the one I laughed at. I keep it on my nightstand. Every now and then, when the moon is high and the clouds are thin, I hear whistling outside my window in the Denver suburbs. It's a rhythmic, melodic sound that shouldn't be there. I told you this story as a friend, but also as a warning. Some things in the dark don't want to be found, and once you find them, they never really stop finding you. Do you hear that? That whistling. It sounds a bit closer tonight, doesn't it?